Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Secret Sunday session. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Her series. So this, of course, is the series where we are talking all about the discovery and founding really of the secret burden and how that became my story, our family's story, and how I met her. So a lot of the previous episodes have discussed when I met her, before I met her, and her, of course, relating to my diagnosis of anorexia nervosa when I was 14. But the last couple of episodes have been full on, and I do appreciate so many people that are jumping on and listening into this, because I know how hard it can be for people going through an eating disorder, because it is really full on. And these episodes aren't light. I go much into detail about why I was triggered, how I was triggered, what led me to let in my eating disorder, and how my family got through it. And this then leads me to this episode where recovering from her. So looking at ways of how I did recover, how I never relapsed, and how I really was able to get myself to a place where I could manage my eating disorder on my own. Because in my particular situation, going through my eating disorder, it was family-based therapy. So my parents, in particular, my mum, took control of my recovery, but that can't be forever. And so I had to then look at, of course, I was able then when I turned 18, that became a legal matter, but also I didn't want my mum to be in control of what I ate every single day for the rest of my life. So I had to learn how to pursue recovery on my own and keep myself accountable. So that's what this episode is going to dive into. But firstly, I kind of just wanted to touch on the past week that I've had and remind people what life can be like, because I did some reflection the other day and realized it is much like recovery from my eating disorder. It doesn't matter if you're going through a mental health condition or you're just living this life. Life is so up and down. And my past week has been so much about that. And if you've been following myself on socials, you would know that. Because sometimes I feel like my life is so extreme in one way or another. And last week it was so extreme and in both ways, but I obviously, if any of you have been following myself, I finally got the print of my book, which means it's finally out there and I've finally started to market to get it out there. And that was a wave of emotions I didn't expect. I remember getting the phone call at the start of the week saying that my book was ready, and just the emotion, you have no idea, that the almost relief, but at the same time, this shot of anxiety hit me, that it was now real and I was now going to have my story physically held in my hands. And obviously I was feeling overwhelmed and proud and all the rest, and scared as well, not knowing if what I had imagined it to look like was actually going to turn out that way. And thankfully it was everything I longed for and more. And so that happened. My book came published, physical. People started buying it, which is another thing altogether, because I think sometimes I think in my head that I'm just going about this, sharing my story, writing a book and raising awareness and creating all these events and really promoting the secret burden in our charity, and thinking at the end of the day, like it's just me hearing me. Like sometimes it's just me talking to myself. But when you see people that reach out and people that start purchasing the book and want to read it and that come along to our events, I kind of burst from my own bubble, thinking it's not just me in this little realm where I'm just expressing myself to heal myself. I am actually making somewhat an impact. And I think that's, for me, that is so powerful, because I've always just thought it was me on my own. And I just want to quickly mention, like, I am so grateful for the amount of people that do tune in, because a lot of this work I feel is on my own. writing the book on my own, doing this podcast, even sitting here and my little laundry, speaking to myself on my own. And it's just such a privilege to see or be reminded that I'm not. And I'm really grateful for that. So thank you. So that happened, the book, and then we had an amazing event with the Secret Burden where we hosted our second upskill ED event in Queensland this time, and it was just amazing once again to be part of an event where we can really start the conversation and raise awareness in, I think, something that's just so real and raw. It's not glamorized. We don't tiptoe around the topic. We're real and we share our stories and we open up, and creating that safe space for people to feel heard is so powerful. And once again, I walked away feeling on such a high from that. And then within like the next 24 hours, we unfortunately had to let down our family dog. And it was a real like slap in the face for me from life. And don't you worry, I went into the whole victim mindset of like really selfishly when I look at it, really selfishly, because I thought, how could this happen to me? And to be honest, I do this quite often when things are not always going up, because I think, haven't I been through enough? And the minute I get a little bit of good, or I feel a little bit of good, I'm just slapped straight back down to earth. And I was really, I think, hard on myself. It happened very quickly. I mean, from the morning we found out we had to take him to the vet, and that afternoon we had to put him down. So there was no real time. I mean, there was time because thankfully we had the day to really have that moment with him, because he had been through, like, we've had dogs in the past, and I don't want to discredit anyone's animals or my own. And obviously it affects everyone differently, but he, for me, was there through a really tough decade for our family. And he was just a constant with just like being there. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to say anything. Of course, you do the normal things of feeding him and walking him, but just knowing he was there was, I didn't realize how much I just missed that presence of having him there. I just knew that he felt me. And sometimes I hated him for it. And this has come up in my therapy quite recently a lot, because I went through a period, and probably like I was only trying to get over it now, of I didn't give him as much love or attention, or I was just angry at him a lot of the time. And, I was talking with my therapist, and I did this a lot because he was the one thing where he couldn't speak, he couldn't judge, and he just loved you unconditionally. And I hated that, because for a long time I thought I didn't deserve that. And when he was there through all my ugly parts, all my messy, my ED, and even, the past 6 months where I've been through such a hellhole recovering, he was just there, and he just always come and be excited to see you and love you. And it sounds awful because I know they can't communicate, but they were always just happy to see you. And I, for a bit there when I was sick, despised him for that, because I'm like, how could you love me? How do I deserve this? But I really do miss him, and I know he's only a pet, but he was there for us through so much. And I did want to touch on that because it just goes to show what life is. It's high, it's low, it's all over the place, and you could feel like you were on top of the world, and the next minute feel like you were so beneath it. And that was last week for me. Felt like I was at my pinnacle, my highest of highs with the book. And then all of a sudden I just got hit with the lowest of lows. And now I'm still trying to get over that low. And that leads me to recovery. Because recovery from my ED was that. I left hospital at a weight that was kind of a stepping stone. It was a weight where I was medically stable based on the system's analytics, but it was just, I had to do the rest. I still had to put on a certain amount of weight to reach what they wanted to see as my ideal weight. And I still had to do the work. My voices didn't just go, my ED did not just disappear. I was just now at a stage where I could cognitively comprehend what treatment meant. And so I knew what I had to do. Whether I wanted to do that or not, that was still my choice, and recovery was still my choice. And I think this is where the conversation around EDs, and I say this a lot because there are so many stigmas out there, is you may not have got an eating disorder, and that may not have been a choice to begin with, but your recovery, that is a choice. You choose to recover, you choose to get over this, you choose to do the work. I've heard this once before in a previous podcast where I interviewed a guest, and I was so grateful because it was such an aha moment for me. But it was like, your ED may not have been your choice, but it is now your responsibility. And for me, that hit home because I don't need to dwell on the why. I don't need to dwell on the how. I don't need to blame those reasons of why I got my ED because they were out of my control. Sure, there could have been some factors that I could have, but that environment that I created, that's out of my hands. But now what I decide to do with that, how I decide to live my life and recover from this, that is completely up to me. And I think a lot of the time where some of us get stuck is we get stuck in the why and the how, and why did this happen to me? And this is, I'm never going to be able to get over this, and it's too hard and it's too difficult. And we're waiting for someone to save us because at the start, someone else may have, I'm only saying this based on experience, but someone else or some environment may have influenced us to develop an eating disorder. So we're waiting for the same thing to happen in order for us to get to the end and to recover when it's not going to. You have to recover. You have to make that choice and you have to do the work. There is no way around it. There is no way under it, over it, tiptoe around it. There's no half in, half out. You have to do the work. And so many times I speak to young people and people going through eating disorders that, are waiting for me just to give them that magic pill or to tell them that magic formula in order to recover. And I'm not going to give it because I'm going to tell them what they don't want to hear because it's constantly what I was told. And it was, Ashlee, this is your responsibility. You have to do the work. Make it happen. And I fought that for so long. So coming out of hospital, I would say I definitely cheated myself. I definitely did. I knew the consequences. I knew I was going to end up back in hospital. Thankfully, I never took myself to that point. And I think why my mum set up an amazing structure that really held me accountable and never pushed me to the point where I completely gave up. So when I left hospital, I had all my team set up for me, and that was pivotal because I knew, deep down, I knew I could not do this on my own. I still needed help until I knew, because I was always very intuitive and in tune with how I felt. And deep down, I knew at that stage, I still couldn't trust myself. My ED was still very strong. And so I was honest with myself in saying that I couldn't, at this stage, still pursue recovery on my own. So we set up a team base. I saw a psychiatrist, I saw a psychologist, I saw an eating disorder family-based therapy trained physician, I saw a GP, and this was weekly. This was weekly for, I don't know how many weeks, but it was a decent, I would say probably 6 to 12 months every single week. And the family-based therapist, who was one of two who were trained in the Morsley program, who actually brought the Morsley program, which is family-based therapy, to Australia. I was being treated by one of those people my family was. And so we were driving 50 minutes every week and sometimes twice a week to this lady to get this specific treatment to really make this work. And not only was I being treated, my family were being treated. So they were being taught of what to do, how to support me, what structures to put in place. Because this time around, as I mentioned in previous episodes, we had 22 weeks before going to hospital where it just didn't work. The family-based therapy was not working. And so this time around, we really wanted to make sure it worked. My parents really wanted to make sure it worked because they couldn't do that again. And so this was our second chance to really be able to overcome her completely. So we did that therapy and it was amazing. Amazing, I think more for my parents and myself, because as I said, I was still in the mindset where my ED was quite dominant. So I was cheating a lot of the time and I was saying I was doing things and I wasn't. So I can't say that it helped me as much as it created the building blocks for them to really build a structure that was going to work at home for me. And then we saw an amazing psychiatrist who was monitoring my medication doses. And he was phenomenal. And he is still someone that I see today. And I don't take medication today based on my own decision, but I still see him because he has always been in my corner and he has helped me so much over the years that I just feel so safe with him. And when I say like I still see him, it's probably like once or twice a year. And that's kind of where recovery can lead to for people. So we did that, and I saw once again an ED psychologist as well to sort of talk me through having my own procedures and tools to help me each and every week. But really the work was at home. That's where it was. All these appointments, they were check-ins and they were giving us the tools and resources to implement at home. But ultimately the work had to be done at home and it had to be motivated by myself. At the start, it was guided a lot by my family, and the first 2 weeks out of hospital, we felt like we were right back where we started. Because obviously it's change again and it's sitting back in the family dynamic, and coming home, I couldn't sleep in my room. I think I slept in my parents' room for probably a decent 12 months because there was so much trauma in my old room. And for me, my anxiety was too high in there. There was too much that I was attached to in that room, and there was too much of her haunting me in that room. So I just couldn't sleep in there. And so I slept in my parents' room. And then recovery looked like the same meal plan. We were on the same meal plan for, once again, timeline-wise, I'm not too sure. I think it was about 12 months of the same rigid meals. When I say the same rigid meals, it was the same thing 7 times a day for 12 months because Anna as well does not like change. And so there was comfort in knowing that I was eating the same thing every single day, even though it was still the however many calorie diet because I still had to put on a certain amount of weight. It was still the same meals. I found comfort in those meals. Anna did. So much comfort. It was difficult in the sense because now, once again, I was now home with my brothers and I was now home with mum and dad full time, and eventually mum and dad had to go back to work. And so in that dynamic, when mum went back to work and dad went back to work, I was home alone a lot. I wasn't working. I wasn't able to go back to school at that time. And so I had to record meals. I'm laughing about this now because I was so over my head, thinking that I was doing the right thing and trusting myself, but I was still sneaking. I was still recording and cutting out bits when I could and not meeting the full requirements because I still had her so loud in my head. And so I was sitting in this quasi-recovery for a really long time, back and forth, where I was cheating myself. I was still eating the same meals every single day. I was still chucking tantrums when I could. They weren't as bad as they were at the start. But they were still there. And I still couldn't go out and eat what I wanted with my friends. I still couldn't socialize. I was still living under her control and a lot of it. at this time around, I was just at home and it was a little bit easier because the tantrums weren't as big and we had a structure. And I will touch a bit on that structure because I think a lot of people I'm talking to didn't get it. And I think this is why I didn't relapse, is because the structure was so strong. And my mum stuck to it. If she threatened, she would follow through. And that's when Anna knew she could never have an opportunity to seep back in or to say that my parents, oh, they were just lying, or it's okay, they're going to give in or they're going to give up, because their structure was so strong. And when I could talk about structure, so like hospital, I was given 20 minutes to eat the meal, part of the plan that was put in front of me. If that wasn't eaten, I was then given the supplements. If that wasn't drunk in the 20 minutes, I already had a bag packed and they were ready to go in the car and for us to head straight back to Brisbane Children's Hospital. And the hospital knew, they set up this structure for us. So they had me on standby, knowing that I could turn up at any stage because they knew that following this structure works. And it does, because it scared me. I knew I did not want to go back to that hospital. That was the one thing I was certain of. I just didn't want to go back to the hospital. So I pushed the limits, don't you worry. I got to the stage where I got to the first 20 minutes, I didn't eat all my meal. The second 20 minutes, I didn't drink the drinks. And then there was times where I went and sat in the car twice. And a couple of times my parents drove to the hospital. But I never got out. And by the end of the drive, I finished the meals because I was just certain that I was just not going back to the hospital. And I think what else is kind of not acknowledged is the more that you eat and the more that you put on weight, you just start to think a little bit clearer. And she slowly starts to become less loud. And so when I say this was on for 12 months, within that 12 months, she was gradually just becoming a little bit quieter. And when I say quieter, I don't say I just woke up and it was quiet. It was just in moments. There were just moments throughout the day where she wasn't there. There were moments transitioning in and out of food where she just wasn't there, where previously she was there all the time. Or there was a moment where I'd finish a meal and I'd be like, I just finished that and I didn't cry. I didn't have a tantrum. I knew what had to be done. I actually didn't even think about the meal. And then you do little challenges, which I think is so important when you feel confident enough during recovery to have challenges. And I set up a challenge a week and they changed. One was, sometimes it would be one a week, but one challenge might have taken up a whole month. So for me, one of the challenge was I wanted to go out and be able to order something off a menu. And that had to be broken down. It wasn't just, all right, go out and all of a sudden just order off the menu and eat whatever you want. It was, I had to download the menu. I had to suss out which restaurant I wanted. Sometimes I had to walk past the restaurant and suss it out before I actually went and ordered at the restaurant. I created an environment that created as minimal anxiety. So that means if it took Monday to Thursday, and I knew I was going to trial this on Friday, Monday to Thursday, to go to that cafe every day and not interact with anyone, but just go there and suss out the environment, see where I'm going to sit, see what the menu's like, and already pre-order, like in my head, pre-order what I was going to get, and suss out kind of the busy locations, what time I wanted to go. If that's what needed to be done to complete this challenge, that's what needed to be done. And that's what I did with these challenges. I broke them down. Obviously, not all by myself. I had support from my mum and my therapist and my team. But I broke them down into really small aspects so that I knew by Friday I could do the challenge. And look, some challenges I didn't always complete. But I started to realize patience. And I'm still horrible at patience, but I started to realize that you need to break down goals. It's not just going straight to the outcome, not going straight to the thing and being able to just like that, complete it. You have to break it down. And in breaking it down, you learn so much. Like they talk about the journey, and that's for me, that is the journey to the goal. And in those journeys, I learned so much about myself and my situation. And I also proved to myself that I've got me, that I can turn up for me. And that even if I don't get to that goal, look at all these small steps that I've made. And in those moments, I did not think this. But on reflection, and this is why I think therapy is so important, because therapists help you realize that. You can be so caught in your head and that perfectionist, and I didn't meet the goal, and I didn't even do this, and I couldn't even get to the restaurant this week, or I couldn't even get to ordering, or I couldn't even select something off the menu. But they go, hang on a minute. Let's talk it through. We'll get to why that occurred. But firstly, look at what you have done. The fact that this is even a conversation is a win. Because look at yourself 6 months ago. I mean, heck, look at yourself a week ago sticking to a meal plan 7 times a day. And now you're even thinking about going and ordering something off a restaurant. And I think that is what's also not recognized in therapy, is that they are the constant reminders and the recognizers of things that you don't acknowledge. Things that are actually really, really amazing that you are getting yourself to and doing. Because she will not let you recognize that, or your own voice will not let you recognize that. It's part of us as human. We need to constantly grow and progress, and we don't stop and reflect and think of how far we've come or how much we're doing. So yeah, it took me a long time. There was a challenge that week. For one of them was obviously at the age that I was, and being a government requirement, I had to go back to school. And this goal, or this challenge of going back to school, took probably 6 months. Every single week. I think probably 6 weeks. And there were some weeks where we'd drive to the school and I couldn't even get out of the car. I couldn't even get in the car to go to school. But once again, we had to break it down. Okay, so today, all you're going to do is get in the car and get dressed. How far we go, we'll see. Some days we didn't even make it out of the driveway, but that's the best that I could do for that day. The next day, we're just going to try a little bit more. So next day, instead of not being able to move from the driveway, we're going to just go to the next street. And then if we're feeling okay, we might go to the next suburb. And then if we're feeling okay, we'll go to the school gates. And this was the process. And I give so much love to my mum, because the patience that she had through all of this, I don't know how she did it. I constantly say this on this podcast and in everything in life, but I don't know how she did it, because watching a loved one first suffer so much and not being able to help, but then a simple thing of like, just go to school, and like her having to just be patient with some days, I'd make it to the school gates one day, and then the next day I wouldn't be able to even put on the school uniform. So that's what I mean with recovery. It's 2 steps forward and sometimes 5 steps backwards. But then the next day it's 6 steps forward. You just have to roll with each and every day. And school was a hard one for me. It was a very triggering environment. People were triggering for me because I'd always cave around people. And especially in an environment where I felt like I didn't fit or I didn't belong. And I talk a lot about school in the book because it was such a big part of my life and a lot of people's lives, but a big part, I think, of my ED journey, especially going back to school. So eventually I was able to transition back to school. As I said, it was probably 6 months before I even sat through a full classroom again. And I was in year 11 at this stage. So that was hard. And it was hard as well because I was coming back with a label. And so that for me was the biggest anxiety. I was coming back as the anorexic girl. And with a school of 400 kids in my grade, a sports excellence school, and I had disappeared for 12 months. And I knew I was a nobody at that school, but there's still that thing inside of you that all of a sudden you just reappear in your classes. And what are the kids going to say? And what are they going to think of me? And how are they going to judge me of what I look like? Because I've changed so much. That was a massive fear for me. It prevented me from getting in the school gates a lot. And as well, the pressure to be back in that environment where I knew I was a grade 8 student, but I was going back probably not going to be that. I was going to go back and be so far behind and not know what's going on, and trying to understand how things have changed and dynamics have changed, and then fit in socially whilst my mum still had to go to school with me every single day and follow my meal plan. So within those however many months I went back to school, my mum still had to come in for morning tea, lunch, and afternoon tea. So my meals still had to be monitored. And part of my treatment plan was mum turning up to school for those 3 meals. So grateful that they allowed me to have a space in the little student services where I'd go in, and every day I'd had to get permission off the teacher. And every teacher was made aware of this. But I had to leave the class at a certain time and go have my morning tea and sit with my mum in a separate area and have my morning tea. And then she'd help me through my anxiety after the meal, and then she'd send me back. And then my mum would either stay in the school, or she'd go to the library across the road or the shopping center across the road, stay in the area, and she'd come back for lunch. And then I'd do this every single day. And my mum did this every single day because this was my treatment. This was the process. And my mum knew she was not going backwards. So she made sure that we stuck to the plan and we followed the plan. And that was hard. That was, I think, really hard on her. But we talk about why I didn't relapse, and I full circle come back to this. There was a structure there. And my mum made sure that that structure was followed because she was not going backwards. That's what kept me accountable as well. It made me realize that this is a treatment. I stopped looking at this as, oh, and look, there were times where I didn't, but I didn't have this overwhelming fear of not thinking that I didn't have to do this, because it was just implanted and embedded in me that this was a treatment process and this is what had to be done. And there was no way around it, because literally there wasn't. No matter what was going to happen, no matter what I was going to do, the treatment was going to be followed. And that was evident because, I mean, we were in a school environment where generally people would say, how does someone recover from an eating disorder when they're at school? How does that work? How do they keep themselves accountable during meals? It worked for me because my mum made it work, and it embedded in me that it was going to work. So we did the work. And I was embarrassed. Don't get me wrong. I was so embarrassed. But I stopped being embarrassed eventually. And I'll tell you why. I will tell you why after this little story, because I'm probably going to go on a bit of a rant, but by now you would know this is me. I just rant a lot. So entering back into school, obviously I was so scared that I was going to be perceived a certain way. This anorexic girl, going to be judged. Everybody's going to put hate on me, not like me. But I entered back through those school gates and I was praised. I was put on a pedestal and I fucking loved it. And I'll be open and honest about this because I know I did. I was a nobody before. Absolute nobody. I was just one of the girls that was part of the netball girls. I was someone that was just in the drama club. I had friends that I sat with that were from my old school, and I wore this invisibility cloak. That's literally how I felt. But I walked back into this school with a label and a charity case. And maybe it's a bit harsh because we're kids. I mean, really we are. I know we're in high school, but we're still kids. But I reflect on it now and I go, what changed? And I thought about this a lot, and I had a label. It was a talking point. And so I all of a sudden had this popularity. And I didn't care why I did. But from that point, I sat in it and I loved it and I soaked it up. And I loved the attention because attention, ideally, is what I'd always wanted when I was younger. It's what I wanted to feel like that I fit in. It's what I thought love was. It's what I wanted from my parents. And I was getting this because I was sick, or I had this label that I was sick. I disappeared. I was this mystery girl and I just reappeared. And now all of a sudden, people that never knew my name knew my name, and people that would never let me sit in their groups were now letting me sit in their groups. And they were calling me over to have conversations with them and discuss like we'd been best friends for life. And I'd have friends to catch up with out of school. And it made me feel like I was in the top class. I'd never felt that feeling before. But like anything we know, even in the modern world, your fame lasts just as long as the next thing that's going to come in and just sweep you off your feet. So you've literally got 5 seconds of fame. And eventually I started to not be the weird new girl that was sick and that, had no friends and had to start again. And the charity case and the one that everybody wanted to be around because she was this new talking point. I was no longer really the talking point. Conversations had shifted, things had changed, and all of a sudden all these friends that I had started to drop off. I also started to recover. And when I say recover, I was no longer dependent on a lot of the things that made me seem like I was sick. So I didn't always need my mum there all the time. I started to do a little bit better at school. My personality started to change. I was no longer the shy one that was just people had all these questions for and were curious about, because she now was becoming a bit more talkative and a bit more open. She was no longer as interesting. And I also overheard a conversation between two females. After one time I was coming back to class after I'd finished a meal with mum and I'd come back to walk into class and I had to get new books for the new class, and I was at my bag and two girls were at their bags and they knew I could hear them. I mean, to be honest, any girls gossiping in a high school environment, they know you hear them if you're talking about them. They want you to hear them. And they knew I was there, and they made a comment that the only reason I got sick was because I wanted attention. And the only reason I had friends around me at this stage is because I was sick. And for me, as I mentioned earlier, as much as I was probably aware that maybe that was the case, I'd never thought about it until right then in that moment. And in that I believed them. I believed at least the second part, that I had all these people were around me because I was sick. So I started to sink and I started to hate school and look to it like I always hated school. It was not an environment for me, but I liked it for that little period because I was getting that attention that I wanted. But in that moment, it was kind of a slap in the face that all this is fake and that everybody is lying to you and that they're all just going to throw you out eventually. It did. I started to see it as soon as they sort of made that comment, whether I then become aware of it or it actually did just start to happen. And as I mentioned, people just started to slip off. It started to then become a triggering environment for me. So I started to cheat myself even more because I started to believe those things, that I wasn't worthy, I wasn't good enough. I couldn't keep up then because I was constantly feeling like I wasn't fitting in. I started to slip again. And so I decided to have a real conversation with my mom that I don't think I want to continue going to school. And so I left. I left and it was the best decision for me. It was the best decision because I think if I stayed, I would have got sick. I would have got a lot sicker because I could see the cracks starting to seep in. And I knew in a way that I had come so far that was kind of my one thing. I remember like in the last episode talking about how I had a moment during my recovery where I made a promise to myself that no matter what happened, I was just going to choose life instead of, for a while there, I was choosing the opposite. So for me, even though I was cheating myself and I was not always pursuing recovery the way that the plan was put in place, I always had this thing in the back of my head that if it got really bad, and that's why, as I said, when I was threatened to go to hospital, I was never going over that edge. I had a point and an edge, and I knew I was never going to that point because I made that promise to myself that no matter what, I was just going to give life a go. And so that was the schooling environment, was that another point for me where I was like, I can see myself going a bit too far. And I can see how this is going to go even worse. So I need to draw the line in the sand. So I had that conversation and transitioned out of school. And people say, oh, like, how did you go? Like, young person leaving school and she's still recovering from her ED. But I was always good on my own. In terms of taking care of myself, apart from when my ED was dominant, taking care of myself, I was good on my own. There was no triggers then. People were the triggering thing for me. So if I had a task put in front of me, work to do, now even looking at my life, like looking after my health and my wealth and my well-being, I can do that. I'm accountable for myself because I have done that pretty much my whole life. The thing that triggers me is other people. And that's where I've had to learn to cope because they can send me backwards just as quickly as my ED can. So transitioning out of school, I then obviously had to pursue different traineeships. So this is obviously going on more of a how did my life look as a whole? And I had to pursue traineeships. I had to be studying something. And I knew one day I may have wanted to go to university. And I just wanted to keep those options open. So I decided to pursue 3 different certificates in order to get me the points to qualify to go to uni if I just wanted to one day. So I did them because, I'm a perfectionist and I can do them all really quickly. And doing things on my own, I smashed. And they were a savior. They were a savior in a way because I was trying different things as well, seeing what I liked and what I didn't like. And I didn't pursue anything in any of those traineeships, but they were also a great distraction for me, as in a project for my recovery. Because I think with recovery, it is so focused on food and refeeding and all about you 24/7 and what's triggering you and what do you need to look after yourself and what environment has affected you this way and what challenge should we be hitting this week. It is so much and it consumes so much of your life that you feel like it is only you, that is all that you are, is your eating disorder. That is all that you can give is your treatment and your process. So you need an out. And it's hard when you can't go exercise, or sometimes you can't socialize with friends, or you can't do the normal things that people do because you have so much anxiety, or you're not allowed to exercise, or you can't eat like other people can eat, depending at which stage of recovery you're in. So it makes it really hard to have an outlet. So I had to have projects, and my traineeships were a big part of that. And when I decided to go to uni, because I ended up going to uni, that was a massive part as well. It saved me as that distraction. I had something and I had a purpose outside of my treatment, which I think is so important for people going through eating disorder recovery. A lot of my ED recovery was play games, look at craft, and man, was I sick of I still to this day cannot stand We just played it so often because after you'd eaten something, you'd had to sit down and be on bed rest. For me, it transitioned at different times, but it was 2 hours after my meal and then it came down to 40. So it was just playing. Because movies for me, I couldn't distract myself out of it. Craft, I'd really just get angry at the pencils because I felt like I was a horrible drawer and I'd be a perfectionist. So was like quick, it was easy, and it was like games. So sick of And to be honest, I didn't even become good at it. But anyway, moving on from my aggression with you have to find something else. And it's going to be different for everyone. But coming home, the one thing that really helped me, I created movies. And it's going to sound weird, but I was a film buff. I loved the entertainment industry. I loved creating content. And back then, all there was some cheap iMovie software. And I had my school laptop that I could use. And so I used my laptop. I wrote down all the scripts that I want. And of course, I was creating horror movies because that was all I could relate to at the time. I was living a horror movie. And so all of my movies were about demons and people possessing and taking over people's bodies. But I loved it. I loved it. I was the script writer. I was the actor. I was the director. I was the producer. And then I was the marketer, even though I was just marketing it to myself. I loved it. And it was the building block for me because I look at my life now and basically I'm doing that, except without creating movies and making them about horror. But I create content and I love it. I love wearing all those hats, writing the scripts, editing them, and then marketing it, distributing it, and finding ways to build stories and character development. I love that. It's always been my escapism. And why should I ignore that if I had such a passion for it? So it made it so much, I think it built a foundation for me that I was not just my ED, or was not just a treatment. I had a purpose. So I had a purpose to wake up every day, because for me, in my head, I had to wake up, and after I'd finished breakfast, even though I knew that was going to be a traumatic experience at 7 or 8 a.m., 9 a.m., I had a meeting with myself as a director, because we were talking about what editing was going to be look like and when my deadline was going to be. Sounds stupid, because of course it was just with myself, but it got me through. Whatever you need to do to get through, do it. Make it happen. Find what ignites you, what gives you your passion, what gives you your love for life, what makes you feel motivated to get up each day and do something, and make it have a long period of time. For me, it didn't work if I was not going to be passionate if I woke up and at 9 a.m. I knew I was going to play or at 10 a.m. I knew I was going to start drawing a mandala, or I knew at 10 a.m. I was just going to start create. Like, maybe that is your thing, but for me, that wasn't. I needed something that I was going to work on, not something I was just going to do. And I created that plan, and I loved it. I loved it, and it brought me back to life. It gave me a life outside of my treatment. So my suggestion, based on my experience, is find something that gives you that passion, and it could be something else. I feel like all of us have a little bit of creativity in us. We just have to find it. It could be drawing for you, it could be singing, it could be dancing, it could be expressive writing, and that's why I reflect on this book as what got me through the last 12 months of me going through my own PTSD diagnosis. Is that book was my project. It was my purpose. I knew every day I had to get up because I had to write, or I had to edit, or I had to design the cover. Those things, and once again, that's a long project. There is a long outcome. The journey is long. It kept me going through while I was also being treated for the thing that I was going through. So it's being able to feel that true self of you whilst also going through something that's quite hard, because going through something that's quite hard can't be your life. It can't be everything. Your world cannot stop. And you can't just put everything into treatment. Of course, there is a period of time where that might be the case, especially if you're quite young or if you're in the middle of your eating disorder. But you do need something else in your life, because once you recover, or once you come out, or once you are recovering, no wonder you're going to think, well, what do I bring outside of my recovery? What do I bring outside of my ED or my diagnosis or my treatment? Because you haven't explored that, or you haven't given yourself permission to be ignited and passionate about something that brings you joy, that brings you life. You need something separate. Find your outlet. Find something that gives you purpose and that makes you feel like that you have something else that you can bring, especially when you recover. Because I know a lot of boundaries and sometimes a lot of conversations that do come up for people, a lot of barriers of recovering from your ED is, I don't know who I am without it. I don't know who I am without her. What do I bring? All it's been is me and her. All it's been is us two, and she's been dependent on me and I've been dependent on her, and she has been my life. It's scary to think what that is without her. But without her, you bring so much, you just have not explored it. And what a perfect time and an exciting time to discover that. And all you do is start is just by trying different things, seeing what things make you just feel good. And even if it's sometimes if you're watching a movie and you find like, why did that scene make me more excited than the other scene? Or why did when I went out and I saw those two people doing this, or when I did this one time, like reflect on your life and think about the moments that made you feel so happy and so alive. How can you create a project out of that? Or how can you do more of that in your life and it not hinder your recovery? I think that's really important, because sometimes people going through EDs go, well, it's just exercise and I need to like go running or I need to do this. And sure, there's a time and place for that. But sometimes that's not going to help you with your recovery. It's what something can walk beside you that doesn't hinder your recovery, that actually supports your recovery whilst also fueling your true self. I feel like my recovery was a lot of self-discovery. because I learned a lot about what were my triggers and what weren't. And I was triggered a lot. So there was a period of time I was off social media for 2 years. It was a trigger. I knew if I wanted to get through this to really give myself the best chance of recovering, I couldn't have my triggers there. And so I got rid of social media. The mirror, massive trigger for me. We covered all the mirrors in our house for 2 years until I knew that I was going to be confident enough to look at myself in the mirror. There were other things. Scales are such a trigger. So didn't see my weight for 2 years. There were other things like going out food shopping. Couldn't do food shopping. Massive trigger. Couldn't watch my mum prepare meals. Massive trigger. Couldn't go clothes shopping. Massive trigger. So there were, 2 years where I felt like I was disconnected. I had my own COVID, pretty much. Disconnected from the world. Isolated myself. Didn't look at myself in the mirror. Didn't look at myself on social media. Didn't engage on social media. Didn't look at the scales. A lot of people probably hearing this and like, oh my God, how did you do that? But I made a promise to myself that I really wanted to give this life a go and see what recovery looked like. And so I had to do the work. It comes back to what I said at the start. If you really want to recover, if you've made that choice, make it happen. And that means sometimes you have to sacrifice the things that you think you want or you think you need or society tells you that you need, and let go of it and just trust the process. Because don't you worry, I really wanted to be on social media where all my friends were. And I really wanted to look at myself in the mirror every day and probably criticize myself. My ED wanted that. I really wanted to look at the scale and know how much I was weighed. But that wasn't going to help my recovery. And I had to give myself the best chance because that was my power. That was me taking accountability and taking actions. Whatever triggered me, I couldn't entertain it. I just couldn't. And I didn't know how long that was going to be. It could have been 6 months. It could have been a week. It could have been what it ended up being, 2 years. But I knew I had to do the work. And I wasn't going to stop until I knew. And as I said, there were moments where I probably slipped and I went backwards and I might have peeked at myself in the mirror or saw my weight and it triggered me. But it kind of also just reinforced that I knew that they were triggers. And once again, I cheated myself and probably could have not told my mom or could have hidden things, but that was on me. And you can blame everyone during recovery. You can blame everyone for not listening or recovery isn't working. I'm doing all the work, but you know within yourself if you were lying to yourself. You know within yourself if you were cheating yourself. And that feeling sucks. Like as much as I think sometimes during recovery, you think you thrive on that and you think you've got power over that because you're like, oh, they don't know. It's like this conniving behavior and being deceitful. And you think that you've got one ahead of them. But flip that and fuck that feeling when it's all on you and you're lying to yourself. That's a slap in the face. I think for me, when I look at how did I get myself out of quasi-recovery where I kept lying to myself and I kept just cheating here and there and not probably pursuing recovery to the full extent. I was sick of just living this life where I couldn't just be free to just do whatever I want. I couldn't be free to not have people on my back checking me every 5 seconds. I couldn't be free to just eat whatever I wanted or to go see people do whatever I want. I couldn't even just go and get a job. Like it sounds weird, but I couldn't just have a normal life. I couldn't get a job because if I was in an environment where it was triggering or food was involved or exercise was involved and she would step in and I didn't know how it was going to react or how my body was going to react. And I didn't want that anymore. I didn't want to be in this isolation, in this COVID isolation for the rest of my life. And it came to a point where I realized like, I am choosing this. People aren't putting me here. My mum isn't doing this for me. I am the one that is choosing to stay here. I am choosing these routines. I am choosing to have the same fucking meal plan 7 times a day. We've discussed with my therapist to change things up, but I've said no. I like the comfort. And got to a stage where I just didn't want that anymore. I didn't want it. I didn't like the feeling. I just wanted to not care and be fully free of her. I just decided, fuck it. And I think there was another real pivotal moment where my mum had a real harsh conversation with me after she caught me lying to myself, cheating. And there were multiple moments where she would have caught me, and the lying was just, I hated lying to them, but it just became second nature. All the shit that you came up with and the excuses that you came up with, somehow just you pulled out of the hat so quickly and you believe them yourself. They could be so extreme. And like sometimes I don't even realize what I was saying, but I hated it. I hated just the deep down, I hated the fact that I just couldn't live my truth. And as I said, I think mum caught me once doing something and she sat me down and she had a real conversation with me. The exactly same thing that I sort of just mentioned, that this is on you. And she made a point. If this is how you want to live your life, I cannot do this anymore. And in that moment, when she was reiterating to me that she was basically going to go on and live her life and she is no longer going to be at my beck and call and she can't be here for me anymore, she can't do this back and forth, I was like, fuck, I'm going to stay stuck here on my own and my family are going to go on without me. They're going to go on and live their life. In this moment right here, my mum is saying that she can't do it anymore. She's done. No longer are you stuck with her in this. You're on your own. And while that sounds so not only scary, but isolating, you have a choice. That is your biggest power as a human. You have the power to choose. You can stay stuck here, but you're going to be on your own. And you can battle with this for the rest of your life, tiptoeing, lying to yourself. Or you can decide right now to go and live your life and walk through the rest of this life with your family, with friends, free, do whatever you want to do. Decide. And I thankfully decided that I didn't want to stay here stuck with her on my own. And I decided to take that leap and that risk to go full in. And as I said, it's still like 5 steps forward, 3 steps back, and all over the place, up and down and crazy. But I just stopped caring as much. I stopped listening. Stopped listening to her and her comments. And the more you stop listening and the more you start defying her, everything that she says, do the opposite. The more she did that, I am telling you, within a couple of weeks, I felt free of her. So free. And look, she'd pop her head up when I did feel triggered because eventually, as I said, the mirrors came down, the social media came back, but we set up systems and structures in place to support me. Because the thing with triggers, you don't want to eliminate them for the rest of your life. You want to get to a stage where you can eventually manage them and live a life where they exist in your world, but you can function and not slip backwards. But we put things in place to make sure that I wouldn't go right back to letting her in. And it worked. Because I started to build up in my head the proof of if I kept going backwards, I was going to be alone, end up back in hospital, I was going to be restricted. And a lot of the things that I started to love and to like in my life, like I started to go out and eat more, I started to have friends in workplaces, I started to work again, and I started to get back into society, that I started to tell myself the minute that I listened to her or if I stopped defying her, all this is going to be taken away. Just like that. So you decide which place you want to be in. Do you want to be back with her alone, thinking about food, those thoughts constantly in your head, can't eat anything, hurting? Or do you want to be out living this life that, yeah, sure, it's hard. To me, it's such more beautiful because you get to experience highs and lows, but it's not just a constant low and you're not dependent on her. You actually have some independence. A big help as well was finding friends at the time that pushed me to go out, that pushed me to go out and socialize. And once I turned 18, to go out and start dancing and drinking. And of course, there's I'm not recommending people to go out and drink, but for me, that was the part of socialization that I'd been so anxious about. But friends were encouraging me and inviting me out. And I'm so grateful of those people in my life that pushed me out of my comfort zone and that supported me through that never judged once I found my people. They never judged, and they just wanted to understand. And they understood the best way that they could and supported me through that by checking in when they could, but also keeping my life as normal as possible, because I think that's really what I wanted. Was everybody was always felt like intoxicated by my recovery and how I was going and whether I was eating and are you eating enough and da 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 da. I just wanted people to treat me as someone normal, someone that didn't have this attachment or this ED attached to her or this sick girl label. I'm so grateful for those friends that gave me that gift. And I'm so grateful for everyone that is tuned in and listened. And I have no idea if I've hit the topic of this episode on the head, because, as I said, last week was a bit of a hectic week for me. And I said to myself with this podcast episode, I don't know where it's going to go because I can't really think clearly, but I'm just going to see what happens and how it rolls out. So I know I haven't missed a lot about recovery, which I am going to do a part 2. So this one for me, I feel, was a lot about recovery being a choice. So recovering from her is a lot about choices, because your eating disorder might not have been your choice, but it is now your responsibility, and you have to take account of your recovery. You have to decide to recover. You have to decide to go all in or live this life. Like at the end, like that is your life. That is, you can blame other people and you can wait for someone to save you. And for so long I did. I waited for someone to save me. I waited for my parents to fix me, for the system to fix me, but it was never going to happen. And that's why I was stuck for so long, because I was just waiting until I was told that nobody was going to be here for you and nobody's going to fight for you anymore, because you were choosing not to fight for yourself. So either you choose to fight for yourself or you stay here stuck in a place where I know you don't want to be. And that was where I came to. I know it's harsh and it's hard, because mental illness can be hard like that. It's hard to tell that to someone when they might not cognitively be all there. But I think that's where you have to really assess the situation and see where your loved one or yourself are in recovery. And absolutely, if you're in the middle of it, I'm not going to be telling you this message, because you might not have the capacity to make that choice. But for me, when I had gained enough weight and I was able to actually understand what my treatment was and what the process was, enough beating around the bush. You're not this sick little girl anymore. It's your life. Make a choice to fucking live it or don't. And I'm so grateful I made that choice. And I'm so grateful for everyone that was willing to start this conversation with me. Next episode, I think I'm going to dive more into the strategies and tools more specifically that helped me during my journey, so that I can actually give people some effective tools that helped me. So talking obviously about the triggers, but also as a carer, I think it's really important to know why people struggle to choose recovery. And I really want to touch on that, because that was a big thing for me. And it's sometimes a real barrier for people not understanding how or why someone chooses recovery, when, we have these ideas of, just choose it. Like, I just don't understand. And I really want to explain that process of why people don't choose it and why I didn't. Because I didn't for a very long time. And there is one reason that really does stick with me, and I'd love to share that, but I know that I've just gone on for too long. So I will touch on that next week and discuss all things part 2 of recovering from her. So thank you so much. Have yourself an amazing day, and I will catch you guys all next time.